We're done. Okay. These last 2 days, you are all hearing about STO, security token offering. Presumably, you are all very familiar with securities and with ICO also. These last 2 or 3 years in France, we are hearing every day about ICOs. The difference is that almost all of the ICOs launched in France these 3 last years were utility tokens. We are more familiar with utility tokens in these environments, but STOs is now the need for investors because, as you know, they are looking for more protection, they are looking for more assets, and security token is underpin the assets of the underlying company. The objective of this presentation is the speech is just to show you what is the regulatory environment summarized in France when you intend to launch an ICO under French law. I must admit that ICOs in France these last 3 years were non-regulated. It will be in the future by Loi Pacte. But concerning STO and security token offering, we are now falling within a more, I will say, common regulatory process with a I would say a regulation which is much more structured and existing at European level. What we have so far is new process with tokenization of the securities, and I will inform you, I will just describe briefly what will be a kind of innovation on the matter through very a new regulation concerning registration of security. Today, we have a kind of need for securities, and in France, it is more and more popular because of position which has been taken from the ESMA. The ESMA is the European Security and Market Authority. It is a European level authority, and they provide some guidelines about what should be considered as a security when we are a token. So far, the ESMA provide guidelines in January saying that when you are offering a token which give right to a kind of entertainment, a financial entertainment with a share in the profit of the company or a share of the dividends or of the voting right of the company. And if you have a predetermined amount of cash which give rise by the token, then you should be in the presence of a security. ESMA is in fact conducting what we know in the US with the OWI tests and the fact that the OWI test is using some criteria to determine whether the token should be qualified as a security. And these OWI tests, when applied, will lead to the conclusion that potentially the Securities Act US will apply. This is the same thing with ESMA, which is conducting this analysis and which is concluding with the fact that potentially securities and prospectus regulation should apply. What does that mean? That means that you are now in a process which is known in France, but not by the Loi Pacte. You all have heard about the Loi Pacte, which will regulate in the future ICOs, but securities are excluded. Securities tokens are excluded from the Loi Pacte. The Loi Pacte will only quote the ICOs conducted with the launch of utility tokens. And then, if you have service providers which will be caught by the Loi Pacte, it is not because they are dealing with security token, but only with the utility token. And then, it is not the Loi Pacte which will regulate security token in the future. The IMF is also of the views that if you have a token which is giving right to the dividend of the company or a voting right, or which give rise also to cash like debt, then you should be submitted to an existing regulation which is the prospectus regulation. And there is no specific guidelines, or there is no specific regulation or position from the French Financial Market Authority which could lead to the conclusion that another regulation could apply or an alternative regulation could apply in this condition. In this condition, what is the regulation? This is a EU regulation which is implemented in all the EU countries, including France. This regulation, this is a directive existing since 2003, but which is now replaced by a regulation from the European Parliament. And the principle is to establish a prospectus. You have all heard about what is the prospectus, but the objective of this regulation is to have identical process and documentation all across Europe, because the objective of the prospectus regulation is to allow an issuer to be authorized in a country, in an EU country, and then benefit from a passport. This passport will authorize and will allow this issuer to use the same documentation in all the other EU countries, so that it is faster, simpler, and costly. I take the example of an issuer located in France is issuing securities through a public offer. This security could be tokenized, and issuer submits a prospectus with the IMF. The IMF has 10 days to, it is filed, the IMF has 10 days to investigate and to analyze this prospectus, and then grants what we call a visa. This visa in hand, the public offer could be conducted in France, but it could be also conducted in all the other EU countries where the issuer wants to offer and market the securities, which means that we have here the EU areas, the EU passport allowing this offer. It does not exist in other countries, which means that it is possibly flexible for EU, but not outside EU. The Prospectus Directive is applicable when there is the offer of securities. As I said, securities are equity securities, which mean a share of the company. It is also non-equity securities as debts, like bonds or notes, but each time you have a receivable on the issuer, you have an underlying assets. And because you have these underlying assets, then you have this offer to the public, which is the marketing conducted to make this offer, and the communication made to conduct this offer are the fact that a regulated entity, an intermediary, is offering this securities as a financial intermediary. On a practical point of view, the prospectus is a document which will provide as much information as possible in relation to the issuer and in relation to the security which is offered. Then you will have precisely to disclose any information concerning the characteristic of the products, the characteristic of the companies, whether you have guarantee, what will be the financial information at the disposal of the investors to be sure that these investors will invest, be fully informed about the nature of the products, the risks taken. You have huge risk factors section which will describe all the risk linked to these investments, and this is mandatory information which is provided in each prospectus. For small companies, you have a new rules which will provide the EU growth prospectus, which is a kind of alleged prospectus, smaller prospectus, when the company is complying with some criteria because this is a small company, because he has a small turnover, which make this prospectus simpler to be drafted, and the process to be complied with when there is a submission with the IMF. But in any case, there is the need for the approval by the IMF of the prospectus to be in a position to offer markets the securities on the French market and to obtain a passport for the other EU countries. Hopefully, you have exemption to file a prospectus and to obtain a visa with the IMF. You have more than 20 exemptions. I will just here provide the main one, the more important one. You are exempted to file and to obtain the visa for a prospectus when you are offering the securities to qualified investors. Qualified investors are professional companies which have certain level of turnover, 50 millions, certain level of employees, at least 2050, and which are in a position to understand the nature of the investment and then to conduct their own investigation and to take the risk without being protected like retail investors. Professional qualified investors are also individuals, but who have a portfolio of more than 500,000 euros, who have the habit to analyze these securities, who have taken professional position in the financial area for at least 1 year, and who are making trades, like, for example, a trade of at least 600 euro per trade and 10 trade a quarter for the last 4 quarters. And then, because of this criteria and assumption, the regulator considered that these people do not need to be protected because they are considered not professional but qualified investors. It's a little bit like the accredited investor under US law. You also fall within the section of the, I will say, private placements when the condition of the offer allow you not to file a prospectus. For example, when the nominal amount of your security is at least 100,000 euro, and when the subscription by the investor is at least for 100,000 euro, then the amount is so important that the regulator is considering that the protection is not necessary for these investors, which there is an assumption that they understand and they can take the risk on this investment. And then this is also an exemption to file a prospectus when you are addressing the offer to this kind of investors. The last exemption, which is interesting for startups and new companies, is a new threshold which has been negotiated last year which has been implemented last year by the French regulator, is that any offer less or equal to 8 million euro a year. In this condition, there is no need to file a prospectus, and then there is no need to obtain a visa from the AMF. There is, however, the need to file a specific document, which is in fact a simplified information document. These documents will provide information in relation to the issuer and the security, but it will be easier, less painful, and then it will be with no need for an approval by the AMF. Under this kind of condition, the type of the offer and the type of the subscriber, the investor, then you can benefit from an exemption. Another way of benefiting of an exemption is depending on the nature of the security. All the securities are not caught by the prospectus regulation, and then if you are issuing certain type of security, you are not obliged and you are not under the obligation to file a prospectus. Some of them are here, such as share capital from member states or central banks or associations which are linked to non-profit bodies or specific securities, once again, which are not necessary the securities you could issue as a commercial company. Concerning fund, because we are all discussing about securities, but securities could be a share in the capital, a receivable, like a bond, and also a share of a fund. But funds are excluded from the directive prospectus. They are submitted to another directive depending on the nature of the fund who is issuing the securities, which called AIFM, Alternative Investment Fund. You have to obtain an approval from the IMF as long as you are offering the shares of the fund which are managed by a specific management company complying with some requirements to be in a position to manage such funds. it is what I just told you there is not new. The fact that security tokens are submitted to this regulation, it's quite classical. There is no innovation in saying that EU prospectus regulation will not apply. This is, I would say, common process for public offer. However, there is somewhere some innovation in France with a process which called the DEEP, which is a new way of registering the securities which have been tokenized. The DEEP is a dematerialized registration of securities through an electronic registry, which is different with the classical process where you have the issue of securities and then the obligation to have a securities account to register the securities, or a classical registry with paper establishing the owner and who is the owner of the securities. It still exists. In the future, you will be in a position to tokenize your security and to register these securities in what we call the DEEP. And in fact, the DEEP will impose a change in our habits because the registration of the securities will be different and will need to be adapted. The holding of the securities will now be done through this dematerialized registry. We can use blockchain. And also the way the general meetings of the shareholders, which are the investor holding the securities, with the rules concerning general meeting, will also need to be amended to comply with this new way of holding the securities. And in fact, the French regulation is providing with this possibility to register the securities in a DEEP, which should be structured in such a way that the registration of the securities is guaranteed and secured. The integrity of the system should also be ensured. The French regulation is not providing for technical details. In the ordinance of 2017 or in the decree of end of 2019, there is just a reference to the existence of the DEEP and the nature of and the characteristic of the security which should be guaranteed for the holder of the securities. But there is no technical aspect. Technical aspect will be the responsibility of the issuer structuring, organizing a DEEP, or of a service provider which will perform the services of offering a DEEP to the issuer in which the security will be registered. The only things that the regulation is providing is the kind of security process, just that backup system, identification measures, security system to be sure that the records and the keeping of the securities is efficient. So far, you have some project in France of issuing an STO, having the securities tokenized and registered in a DEEP. As far as I know, and I'm not from the regulator, there is no security token offering which has been launched, but some of them are under the process. And also we are in a classical regulation. This is quite new to have this dematerial register, the DEEP, which does not exist in all or the other countries, which is a kind of innovation for France. Also, I appreciate that for an issuer who conducted ICO this roughly 3 years in France, and now being in a process of launching an STO, you are now falling with more constraints and more complicated and structured regulation, which is at European level. Because you have the benefits of tokenization of your security, which is more liquidity, being traded seven days a week, 24 hours a day. However, you have all of these benefits with wide-based investor and having more liquidity for these securities, but you have also some limits. The limits I see is that when we launched an ICO a few years ago, when I say a few years ago, or last year, for example, we were just analyzing some of the regulation in some of the countries, which meant that we were just thinking about taking care of China regulation, taking care of US regulation, not to be caught by Securities Act, and, for example, for French issuer, France regulation. But potentially, the token as utility were offered as subscribed in other countries, and without the issuer having really being informed about the risk of the regulation, because in most of the countries, there was no regulation at all. When you're talking about securities, the notion of the passport, which is more flexibility, is only in Europe, which means that you only have 27, 28 countries in which you can benefit from the flexibility of the passport. But if you want to offer your securities in the US, you will have to comply with the US Security Act and the US regulation. You will have to comply, investigate, and be very cautious about complying with this regulation in all the countries where your security could be offered and market, which is much more painful, less flexible, because the passport at worldwide level does not exist at all. It only exists for Europe. It is perhaps in the future a way to be much more flexible and to facilitate the offer of securities to have a passport at worldwide level. Because today, making a security token offering is without considering worldwide. It is just some areas when you could invest and be sure that all the regulators from all the countries outside of EU will approve your prospectus or will make sure that you benefit from an exemption to make this issue. It is not so flexible as like for ICO and utility token, where it was possible to issue because of the lack of regulation in more countries. Do you have some question?
No. Thank you. No, I was just saying we're running.
Okay, we are running out of time?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.